Hey everybody, welcome to .NET Rocks. This is Carl Franklin in New London, Connecticut, and my co-host in Atlanta, Georgia, Mark Dunn. Good evening, Mark.
Hey, Carl.
What's happening?
Man, lots of good stuff is happening. I just wrapped up an ASP.NET class today.
Is this the same class you were telling me about that it was only on the second half of the last day that you cracked open Visual Studio?
Yes, that's actually the way the class was written, but I teach it quite a bit differently than that. I kind of use the book to prop the door open, and we start out using Visual Studio.NET the first day.
I tell that story how you almost were threatened with physical violence the first time you taught it.
And that's the truth. The first time I taught that, it was all using Notepad, and it was not a happy bunch.
Got some good evals, you told me.
Yeah, I got a perfect set of evals out of this group, so I was very thrilled with that.
That's good. Well, the content writers ought to sit up and take note of that.
Yeah, I just heard recently they're euthanizing that course, so...
Congratulations.
Yeah.
That's good for everybody. So, hey, guess what? .NET Rocks is listed at msdn.microsoft.com/vbasic, the Visual Basic homepage for Microsoft. We're listed on the right under Events. We have a link right there, third from the top, .NET Rocks. How cool is that?
That's cool. I feel like running out on the road, like Steve Martin saying, I'm in the phone book.
We have arrived.
That's right. We are somebody.
Well, this last show we did has only been on the air for 2 days since this recording, and we had 300 downloads the first day and 300 downloads today. So this is getting ridiculous here. We're buying some more bandwidth to make sure that everybody gets to listen to it.
Yeah, we can never have enough bandwidth.
We got some serious bandwidth here in New London. I happen to be right across the hall from Interbridge, and they have an OC3 to the central office. Now in Connecticut, you pay with OC3, you pay by the mile from the central office. If you open up my window and spit, you'll hit the central office. So, and that is sitting right on the Sprint backbone. We have about, I don't know. Well, this is boring anyway. Let's get on with the show.
Yeah, aren't we going to talk to this guy named Bill Vaughn tonight?
We are, but before we introduce Bill, I wanted you to tell me about this new discovery that you made in class this week about ASP.NET.
Oh, which discovery is that? Is that changing the file extensions?
Yeah.
Yeah, we were playing around with some standard ASP. Or really classic ASP pages. So all we did was we went in and changed the extension from ASP to ASPX, pulled it right into the framework. It ran, with the exception of a few things. Any
Like
objects that we were trying to instantiate
objects, yeah.
or read. If they have default properties, you've got to go in and tweak that code.
Right.
But I was just amazed. I should have tried that earlier. Had no idea.
So you mean the angle bracket % code works?
Yes, the angle bracket % code works just fine.
So if you have like a angle bracket % equals and then a variable, you can stick that in the HTML?
Sure, that works just fine.
Huh.
The problem you run into is something, like angle bracket equals RS field name.
Right.
Right? So that's counting on the default value property for the record set.
Yeah.
It'll choke on that.
Huh. Wow, that's great. Now, you also were telling me something about control arrays.
Right. The single biggest question I get from VB developers in .NET classes is, how the heck do I do a control array? So I've used the same method you did before in teaching them. So today, a guy was going, that's good and all, but what I'd really like to do is be able to write a little loop and run through and check things on these controls that are grouped together.
Right.
So we just started looking around. We stuck some option buttons into a group box, and if you look at the properties of a group box, you'll see a property called controls, and that's actually a controls collection of all the controls contained within the group box itself. So that makes it very easy for you to iterate through really anything you put in a container as a group box.
So in other words, the controls collection on the form only has references to those controls that are directly on that form. If you have a group box or a panel or something on the form, then that will have a controls collection where the controls on it will be referenced, right?
That's right. It's kind of like a sub controls collection.
Yeah, that's cool. That's very cool. Well,
so yeah, not a day goes by that I don't seem to discover something new and interesting about .NET.
Yeah, me too. Me too. It's just an endless journey, and a lot of people think it's intimidating because they have to learn a lot of new stuff. But once you get over that initial hump, it's smooth sailing. I think.
Yeah, that's right. It becomes fun after a while. It's intimidating in the beginning, but you settle into it. It's a great trip.
Well, speaking of trips, let's take a trip across the country to where the hell are you from, Bill?
Actually, I'm not from anywhere at all, but I'm currently living in Redmond, Washington.
You're not from anywhere at all, so did you crawl out of Atlantis from some ooze or something?
Like that. I was an Army brat and was born in D.C. and didn't live there long enough to dry off, and went to kindergarten in Wiesbaden, Germany, and grade school in El Paso, Texas.
What? Wow.
And
kindergarten
high school in Alexandria, Virginia, and then finished high school 4 years in Bangkok, Thailand.
No kidding.
No kidding.
Wow, you've had an interesting life, Bill. It seems like I read in your bio that you were a chopper pilot.
Did that too. Spent a couple of years in college, and then volunteered to go to Vietnam just before they drafted me.
Thank you, by the way. Probably don't hear that enough.
Well, I appreciate that. So when we came back from Vietnam, we were told not to wear our uniforms.
Yes.
But been there and done that. Lived a number of years in Texas, so I kind of claim Texas as kind of a home state. But I've lived here now longer than I did in Texas, so about 15 years here in the Redmond area, which is this is a dynamite place to live. This is very, very cool up here, so to speak.
That reminds me of something we were talking about before we started recording, which was a sort of a letter you got, and I didn't really understand until you said that you had spent some time in Texas and lived in Texas. So what was that email that you got about?
Well, I had Texas? A customer at the last faucet show that was upset with me because this person thought that I had made fun of the great state of Texas. And I had said, well, we've got an extremely large result set here, and this result set is, say, you've done a select star from all the Social Security recipients in the state of Texas. And this person took umbrage to that as if that was bad, and I was just trying to refer to the fact there's a lot of rows.
Right. It's a lot of people in Texas, after all.
There's a lot of people in Texas, and it was just typical of the kind of query that I keep getting. The guy calls up and says, the performance in this application really sucks. And I says, well, what are you doing? He says, well, I'm pulling back 200,000 rows, and it's just kind of slow.
Yeah. So you really need to use all 200,000 of those at the same time.
Yeah. I said, well, generally, how is your customer dealing with that? Do they have a really small font so they can show them all at once? Or I'm not sure how that works out.
Big long list box.
Yeah.
Arial 0.7.
Yeah, that's it. Well, I'm not sure Arial 0.7 would do that.
They probably wouldn't. You're right.
No. 1 pixel per. I'm not sure that'd be too many pixels if you use 1 pixel per customer.
So you're used to controversy then? Oh
yes. If there's not enough controversy, I just make some.
Well, okay, that's a good point because you didn't come on here this show to talk about Texas. You came to talk about Jet.
Yes, I'm afraid so.
So let's stir up some controversy here.
Well, one of the things I did when I was at Microsoft, I was all the time in trouble with the MDAC team, the people that make Jet, the Jet engine team, and I was on their case from the day they shipped the product until it went into the QFE mode, which is into retirement here not long ago. And I'm just not real thrilled with Jet. The problem with Jet is that it's too easy to use and too easy to abuse.
First of all, let me define a couple acronyms. QFE stands for Quick Fix Engineering.
Yeah, there you go.
And what does JET stand for?
That's the Joint Engine Technology.
And that is what?
That is the database engine that's used by Access. It's used by everything in Visual Basic from VB3 on. That's the JET database engine. That's how you create an MDB. That's how you access an MDB. Access used to use only JET, but nowadays Access also lets you create and use SQL Server databases through MSDE, the Microsoft Data Engine.
Okay.
when you talk about JET, you're talking about access databases.
All right, so the way that you get to access databases to MDB files in VB is through JET.
Basically, yes. And that's the little desktop engine that gets installed. It's not that little.
Right.
Gets installed on every single client system. So it's not a client-server system by any stretch of the imagination.
So if you had to pick the number one problem with JET, what is it?
Well, the number one problem with JET is that it is really prone to damage caused by the end user and the way they actually use computers nowadays. What happens is when you open a JET database and you start something off, you start doing some updates, and if the user doesn't think things are going fast enough, they have a tendency to give the computer a three-finger salute. They reboot the computer, or they walk away from it, or they simply turn it off and they turn it back on again, like it's some sort of a TV, and they slap it on the side a couple times. And
okay, so that's a nice way of saying it's pretty slow.
It's slow too. So the kinds of things that developers often do make it slow, and if they don't keep it snappy, the users get frustrated. The users turn it off, and you end up with a corrupt database. And
what are some of the bad things that users do with JET?
Well, it's the users are sometimes given the option to write their own queries. Show me all the Social Security recipients in the state of Texas, or all the Barbie dolls in the entire that exist on the face of the earth.
Right. So I don't want to get any email from Mattel.
Right.
Well, there's a lot of Barbie dolls stuff. It's another big data set, and there's a lot of things, and they try to do too much with it.
Right.
And it's the application. It's not the users that are making these mistakes.
Okay.
It's the application developers that are making these mistakes.
Because they're allowing the user to do crazy things.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of applications with select star from table, and that's the way they create the result set and then deal with it on the application side.
Well, don't get me started with that.
Even the demos for VisualStudio.net, that demos that mostly you see with the data adapter have to do with selecting everything from a table.
Absolutely true, and it's every Likens example you see is a select star from customers, and we can go on and on about the sanity of select star just by itself, pulling back columns that you have no idea what you're pulling back. Whether it could be a blob column, it could be binary, it could be floating point stuff you're not prepared for.
So you think this is because of laziness or habit or both or what?
I think that there's all kinds of VB developers. There's VB developers that are bright and understand the issues and understand data access, and don't make those mistakes because they say, "Oh yes, I understand." But on the other end of the spectrum, we have the mom and pa Kellys out there that don't have any computer science training, don't have any data access awareness, they're just barely working with VB, and they're basically pasting in examples they get out of the book and hoping things work and assume those are correct.
Yeah.
And so if you have a bell-shaped curve of distribution of these developers, we have an awful lot of them that are doing dumb stuff.
Now, Bill, we have on the line Ma Kelly and Pa Kelly who have issue with that last comment, and they'd like to talk to you about it.
Okay, absolutely. Bring them on.
No, I know what you mean, and especially it's going to be difficult for these kinds of developers, that haven't done the real hardcore stuff that came from either Access or from VBA or something like that, and don't have a foundation in computer science or even in, the fundamental ideas of computer science. And it's going to be more difficult for them to stay afloat in .NET anyway, I think.
I think it is, too. It's going to be tough for them. And where Microsoft needs to kick in and where the application vendors need to kick in is when they create these kinds of databases, if instead of using JET, if they used MSDE, for example,
right,
the kinds of things that they could do to themselves would be far more limited. The chances of them corrupting their database would be virtually nil.
Why don't we just ship SQL Personal Edition with every virtual Visual Studio?
I think you'd have to talk to the Justice Department about that.
Ah, well, okay. Good point taken.
Another issue. But I think it makes sense to have MSDE as the only database engine in Access.
All right, acronym police here. What's MSDE stand for?
That's the Microsoft Data Engine. That's just simply another version of SQL Server that's free, that's designed to limit you based on the size of the database. It's about the same limit as JET as far as the database size, and it's governed to slow the database down after 5 simultaneous operations are being executed. In other words, if you have 50 people, and of those 50 people, 5 of them pressed enter all at the same time, they would get their job done. But if a 6th person hit the enter key at the same time, then the database would slow down by some factor.
So that's why they call it a desktop engine?
That's why they call it a desktop engine, and that's why it's free.
Okay, and is this like a replacement for Jet?
Microsoft is positioned this as a replacement for Jet. I think that's what they're trying to do. And if you start looking at the features and functionality that Jet supported, you notice that there's now a pretty close mapping one-for-one with those features in SQL Server. Things that Jet had that SQL Server didn't have, as far as some of the kind of user-defined functions and those kinds of things.
Right. You know, Bill, I don't work a lot with Jet, but I tell you some problems it's caused me in the past. I didn't understand in the beginning when I first got into database programming really the idea of a server database and the fact that the database engine was actually running on the server rather than the client. And, you know, that was a problem with Jet. If I tried to access an MDB file over the network, and I ran a query like select first name, last name from table where user ID is equal to 10, it was actually pulling the entire table over the network to the client so Jet could resolve that query there.
It was worse than that. It did all the physical I/O was done over the net. Every bit of the physical I/O, including the accessing the locking file, everything was being done over the wire. And it is extremely inefficient.
Right, I found that out a hard way. I had a consulting client a long time ago that wanted a Jet solution. So I put one together for them, and at the time, the database was very small. They maybe had 3 people using it. So about a year later, they called me up and said, you know, this thing is killing our network. So I get back down there, and, you know, the database has grown to be huge by Jet standards, and, you know, they had about 20, 25 people hitting this thing all the time.
Well, this is the other issue that I'm seeing in the industry. We keep hearing the same story over and over again, is where the customers are designing systems. And the consultant goes in and says, okay, I'm going to give you a solution. And the customer says, no, this is what I want. It's like a patient going into the doctors and says, you know, I want you to give me this particular kind of heart surgery. And the doctor says, excuse me, you need a bypass. You don't need an angioplasty. And the customer says, this is what I want. And then when the patient dies, they don't complain anymore. But it's
so death is always an option.
Yes, and we hear this over and over again, where the customers don't really know any better, and the developer, the consultants, are really they're at their mercy. They're in such tenuous position. They want the work, and they say, okay, we'll do it your way. You're a knucklehead, but we'll do it your way. And this is what we end up with.
I had a fascinating discussion today at lunch with a guy who's in my class. I'm teaching a VB master class this week, and I have a guy who was interested in random access files in VBNet because they have a flat file system, and they support hundreds of users. You know, it's all using random access mode, so he was curious as to why fixed length strings weren't supported. Actually, they are supported, and this is a weird marketing thing that Microsoft tells you no fixed length strings, but yet there's a compatibility library which is part of the framework and isn't going away that has this fixed length string sort of a kludge for fixed length strings. And so I found some code and I helped him figure it out. But I asked him, I said, why don't you check out SQL Server or something, more up with the times and a little more efficient? And he said, we did. He said, we converted all our stuff over to SQL Server, and we ran this on a 1 gigahertz machine with half a gig of RAM, and it was slower than our flat file system. And I said, well, did you do indexing? He said, yeah. He said, did you do this and did you do that? They use their database primarily for read-only access. They don't do a lot of updating. The updating they do is offline with another program. And I just thought that was fascinating.
Oh, I can believe it. SQL Server and its architectures are designed for scalability. It's designed to support one user through 1,000 to 10,000 users with the architecture, with the same applications being able to support all those users. Their ISAM system, and I worked on ISAM systems in the mainframe business, and they're very, very fast. There's a lot of great ISAM support utilities to make ISAM management very easy.
Okay, what's ISAM, Bill?
That's the Index Sequential Access Method.
Which is basically your flat file B tree kind of stuff.
That's a flat file, and what you get generated along your flat file is a set of indexes, and these indexes, in fact, index specific records.
Right, at byte positions.
It's very simple. These programs ran in 32K on a mainframe.
Right.
64K on a mainframe. So they did not take a lot of space, and they're brutally simple and very, very fast. They work very close to the hardware, and I can see how they'd be fast.
Right, but the guys are not really writing ad hoc queries against it, are they? I mean, they know the structure of what they want.
Precisely. There's a lot of stuff built into the application, and they basically generate an ISAM key. This is the row I want, and they go out and pull it in, and it's very, very fast. And Jet, as a matter of fact, can be and has been demonstrated to be faster than SQL Server in some applications. It's not a factor of performance here. It's a factor of safety and scalability and stability and the ability to back the database up. Jet cannot be backed up until everybody is off of it.
Right, because
so
the file's locked.
The company scenario that I keep hearing about, and there's a company here in town, a large hospital here in town, that has a plethora, that's another technical term I'll explain to you, lots of databases that are spread out all over the hospital like a rash. Every little department, and these databases are not being run by the IT department. They're being written by and managed by doctors, their assistants, the assistant to the assistant doctor, to administrative people, to everybody's got one of these little databases. And they are driving the IT people crazy because they're putting mission-critical stuff on these databases, and they aren't backed up. They cannot be restored. They cannot be repaired successfully, and they're losing data. They're losing important customer, client, patient information, business information, and it's costing them a boatload of money because they're based on Jet. Now, if they're based on MSDE, the IT department can say, okay, interesting, you've got an MSDE database. Tell you what we're going to do. We're going to change the path, one-line change in your application. We're going to point to the central server version of your database. We're going to take that database over, and we're going to back it up every night. Or they could back it up remotely without the customer even knowing it and restore it and do all the administrative work centrally. It's not that the administrative work is that much more difficult with the SQL Server. It can be all set up with wizards and so forth. It's very easy to do. It's just not being done at all with Jet because it's really, really tough to do. Jet also fills up. When you delete a row in Jet, it doesn't go away. It's just marked for deletion, and your database continues to grow. When you update a row in Jet, the row is not changed in place. It's deleted, and a new row is inserted. So the database continues to grow. This is not unusual for the architecture. That we see that all the time. However, you have to periodically scrape all that old stuff off, or you'll exceed the capacity of the file after a while.
Right, isn't there a utility or something you have to run to compress it?
Precisely. And this utility has to have exclusive use of the file. It makes a copy of the file. It simply goes through and reads all the rows and writes them to the new file and deletes the old file.
So in other words, you have to have downtime.
Precisely. And with SQL Server MSDE class databases, this is built into the architecture, something you don't need the downtime for because customers simply can't afford to bring it down for 12 hours, 4 hours, 2 hours, or 20 minutes to back it up. MSDE is SQL Server. It is SQL Server. The same binaries, the same utilities work against it. It's just the distributable version of SQL Server.
Right, so it's crazy to be using Jet today if you could use MSDE.
It's Looney Tunes. Now, MSDE is not a universal panacea. It has a number of issues. One of its issues at Microsoft, in my opinion, is politics. Microsoft has to get behind it. Microsoft has to have a champion, somebody who says, Mike, this is my product, and by God, you're not going to make any changes to it without me knowing it. I've been in touch with the users, and we just went to an author summit, and I brought this issue up. I brought it up until they started throwing things at me. But since the author summit, and that was like a month ago, I've had so many product managers get a hold of me. Says, this is what we're doing. We are excited about MSDE. We agree it needs to be fixed. These are the things we're doing. We now have a how to use MSDE legally in clear English terms that's just been put up on the web. And it's great. They've gotten behind it. I've heard of a new product or two at Microsoft that I can't talk about that are, in fact, using MSDE as their target engine.
Hey, this is Carl. I was just looking at the web statistics for last week's show with Mark Anders, and we had over 1,500 downloads. And the number of downloads every week has been steadily increasing. Last week's show, the download count was over 1,500. But still, I would like to ask you a personal favor, and that is to help us spread the word about .NET and to spread the word about this show, about .NET Rocks. If you belong to a .NET user group or your company has a newsletter, maybe we could put a banner on your website or something like that. Send a link to your VB programmer buddies. Just spread the word for us. We sure would appreciate it. We're going to scale this show up as far as it will go, and I'm very excited about it. It's a great new project for me and Mark as well, and it certainly is a good service to the .NET community. So we got some great guests coming up on .NET Rocks. Next week, Rockford Lotka is going to be our guest, and he's going to be talking about remoting and business objects and all sorts of great stuff. And we'd like to hear from you. We'd like to hear your questions. So send those questions for Rockford Lotka to .NETRocks@franklins.net. I don't care how stupid you think they are. Send them in anyway, and we'll let Rocky be the judge of that. In the upcoming months, we're going to have such people as Scott Stansfield, Alan Cooper around the first of the year. He is the father of Visual Basic, the guy who developed the interface for VB 1.0 and custom controls and all that stuff. He's a great guy. He'll be with us. Just an incredible number of experts and authors, all here to answer your questions and explain things to you in everyday English. Coming up, Bill Vaughn talks more about MSDE and JET and explains a few things about the data adapter and ADO.NET. So keep listening. You won't regret it. So let me ask you this. The listeners out there saying, okay, Bill, you've convinced me I'm going to check out MSDE. Does it come with Visual Studio Net? Do I have to download it? Can I just write databases in SQL Server and then distribute MSDE? How do I use it? What's the practicality of it?
MSDE comes with the bigger versions of Visual Studio, not the basic version, not the $99 version.
Okay.
But it comes with all the bigger versions. It comes with SQL Server, all editions. It comes with Office. It comes with Access.
Okay.
So you may already have it.
Okay. Could I go online and download it if I didn't have any of those products?
It turns out that you can, but then there's this legal issue. The legal issue Microsoft wants you to do is own one of the development tools. You need to own Office Developer or Access Developer or Visual Studio or Visual Basic 6 or one of the development tools in order to be able to use it. That's where they want to get their dime.
Okay. And so I would download this thing. What is it, about 4 megabytes or something?
It's not very big.
Not very big.
Yeah.
All right, so I download this thing. Do I just use that as a distributable, or do I have to develop against it also?
I would not recommend developing against it. I would recommend to any developer to get MSDN Universal where it just comes and you get all the tools. So you use the real tools.
And you'd also have SQL with MSDN
right.
Universal.
But if you want to target a single user, few user database or something to replace JET, you get this MSDE Universal with the tools.
Okay.
So you develop just like you would any other SQL Server database, including the stored procedures and all the replication and all that stuff. It's the same. And you develop with SQL Server. When you're ready to target, you build up a package, and it has a package and deployment wizard that helps you put together the automated assembly that, in fact, will help you install MSDE.
Now, what has a package deployment wizard? SQL does?
Visual Studio.
Visual Studio Net does.
Right.
Okay, so in lieu of that, you could always just go into SQL Server and say, create my scripts, right?
You sure could. And if you just have MSDE and don't care about the license, you can, in fact, do all this stuff through scripts because it comes with OSQL. That's the command line batch utility. And you can run scripts to create databases if you want to, if you're in that kind of abuse. It turns out that I just got up on the news groups, and there is a list of third-party administrative tools, a whole series of them here. Some are available through, two of the three are from Microsoft.com, and it looks like what's this new web utility, this new web interface that they're creating websites with?
The Web Matrix?
That's it, the Web Matrix. Apparently, it also knows how to create MSDE databases and be able to do some administrative tasks.
Huh.
But the best tool by far is the SQL Enterprise Manager.
Right.
And without the tools, see, SQL Server has so many very cool tools to use.
Right.
The profiler to see exactly what's getting executed. And the Enterprise Manager that lets you do everything. The create permissions, create databases, create stored procedures, set up and drill into the bowels of the server itself and see and make all the setting changes and so forth and tune it up for yourself. And those things, without those, you can whittle, but it's like whittling with the edge of a sharp stick. So it's.
So, Bill, let me ask you a couple of questions. You know, Carl, I always get excited during our chats. I'm getting excited now. As a consultant that works with a lot of small companies, let me give you a scenario and tell me if I could really do this. Say I do have a mom and pop shop that can't really afford to buy SQL Server. Is it possible that I can use MSDE to write a solution for them because I know that the governor limits are not going to be a problem for them? Is that doable?
That's the whole idea. And it's not for the mom and pop to develop that system, but it's for the consultant to be able to go and say, listen, I've got a solution that's not going to cost you any more than Jet.
Well, let me ask you then, does MSDE work as a service, as a server?
It is SQL Server.
So it's running MS SQL Service. Let me ask you another thing, Bill. I mean, I'm really getting torqued up about this. Is the agent service out there too? Am I able to create jobs, operators, like I'm able to do in SQL Server?
If the agent is installed, yes, you can. Does the MSDE distributable come with the agent? And I don't think it does.
Well, I definitely need to look into MSDE, and I certainly have not looked at it before now.
But what you can also do is you can fake some of the agent work yourself using SQL DMO, again, programmatically.
Oh, acronym, please.
SQL DMO is the data manipulation objects that are shipped with SQL Server. It's a DLL designed specifically to do administration work with SQL Server.
Is it ActiveX COM-based?
It's COM-based.
All right, so just a big object model that I can write VB code against if I want.
And I've got some examples of SQL DMO in the magazine articles that I've written. The examples are on my website.
And what is your URL, by the way?
www.betav.com. That's BETAV.com.
Very good.
One other thing, Bill. What about data transformation services? I'm quite fond of that in SQL Server. Does MSDE ship with any support for that?
No. Well, wait. You said there's two things you said. It does not ship with DTS, but you can use DTS against it. In other words, there's another DLL involved with DTS.
All right. Now, what I'd like you to do is explain what DTS is, because I swear to God, 9 out of 10 database programmers don't even understand this.
Preach on, Brother Carl. That's the absolute truth, and it's a great thing.
Data Transformation Services, DTS. This is the engine that Microsoft created some years ago because it got so many customers that wanted to move data from Oracle or to Oracle, from or to AS400, from or to JET, from or to text files, ISAM files, peanut butter sandwiches. It's designed to access any kind of data structure, flat, hierarchical, ISAM, anything, and transform it into SQL Server tables and backward again.
Sort of like XSL for SQL.
Something like that.
It's like the Babel fish.
Yes.
I had to bring that up since you read a book called The Hitchhiker's Guide to SQL Server.
Here come the analogies now. So DTS, Data Transformation Services, is just a way to get my data from this database to that database. But this was before web services was the integration platform.
Right.
So, for example, I could have my program accessing MSDE here on my local app, on my local computer, and then every night at 3 o'clock in the morning, I could have that ship off my changes up to a SQL server over the internet that was in some other location. Is that right?
Absolutely right, but you wouldn't use DTS for that.
Okay.
You'd use replication services.
Replication services.
MSDE and SQL Server, because of the same binaries, because it's really the same, are designed to communicate with each other. And there's some licensing restrictions that says these are the only kinds of replication you can do. But there's a full-featured replication scenario that lets you upload and download. For example, the insurance salesman goes into the field, makes changes to the local version of his MSDE database, makes all those changes, works all day, goes to the home at that night, plugs in, connects, and then pushes a button, and a very simple programmatic connection can, in fact, perform the replication with the main database.
Sync them up.
Move the database, the new stuff up, and pull the stuff back down from the server without him doing anything.
Can I ask you this? Can we set up a SQL server in Chicago and a SQL server in Los Angeles and a SQL server in Boston and sync them all up so that when a record gets added to Boston, it'll automatically and instantaneously get replicated to the other two?
That's the whole idea behind replication. That's what it's designed for.
Does it support all the models of replication? I think you've got merge, snapshot, transactional.
Remember, it's the same binaries, but I think there's licensing restrictions that prohibit it from you doing certain types of replication.
SQL Server
and I'm not a replication expert here. I just know that there are excellent scenarios at work.
And SQL Server obviously doesn't have those issues.
No, it does not have those issues. It supports 6 different kinds of replication, of which I am not familiar.
That's fantastic.
I'll let Kimberly Tripp or Stacy Birch answer the questions when it comes to those. Those are my administration experts. So
why did you leave Microsoft?
I'd been with Microsoft 14 years, and before I came to Microsoft, I had been in the industry for 22 years. And I'd really had enough of politics. I wanted to do a lot more writing. I wanted to do a lot more speaking without having to look over my shoulder and without having to worry about whether I was making somebody mad. And I was making people mad all the time.
Yeah.
It's just my nature, I guess.
Well, you speak truth.
Yeah, that'll do it every time.
Well, Microsoft is not a shallow company in that sense, but I just felt uncomfortable sometimes. Now, for example, I was speaking at a user group for a small conference here in Redmond when I was working for Microsoft some years ago, and I characterized JET as a toy database even back then. In a serious SQL Server is a serious database, JET is a toy, and the product manager for the JET team happened to be standing in the back of the room.
Oops.
And after they revived him, he apparently called his manager's manager, who called my manager's manager's manager. And I got this. I was on the podium, and not 45 seconds later, I was paged. And it was a text message that said, about JET, and expletive deleted. It was ugly. And it didn't take that long for them to get back at me. And they have, it's always been this kind of a push and shove with the JET group.
Oh, yeah. Well. I mean, you got to be real, you know.
Well, I think developers, they don't want the marketing hype so much as they want what works and what doesn't. And I'd like to keep my topics positive. This works. Man, we got a lot of good stuff, and Visual Studio is really cool.
It's hard to be negative about
VisualBasic.net is really cool. It's a lot of cool stuff. I don't like the name, but it is really cool.
Yeah.
And calling it ADO.net, the only similarity between ADO and ADO.net is the font.
Well, yeah, people expect it though from Microsoft for marketing. You know, they want to. It's all about perception.
It is. It's all about perception and making them feel good about their stuff and keeping them from worrying. And I understand that too. And
I don't think the smart developers out there really care.
But remember that Visual Basic is not the Visual Basic developer community is not all the same.
Right.
As a C++ developer, you can characterize a C++ developer. You can just picture that person in your mind, and
true.
You're 90% correct. Yeah. A C# developer, you can characterize that person. You know what they look like, or a Java developer. You kind of know what they look like.
Well, a hardcore VB developer, you can sort of characterize.
Right. And the hardcore developer, but what the heck is, they kind of lump all the people together.
I got it. You can tell them by how often they shampoo their hair.
Right.
I think that's basically it. The C++ guys never shampoo because they're so busy writing code all the time, they never have time to shower.
Precisely.
The C# guys are they have a little bit cleaner hair because they shower every other day or something like that, because they still spend a little bit of time matching case and case sensitivity and putting in all those semicolons.
That turns them on. That magic.
They love that.
Yeah, so the VB developers are doing commercials for shampoo on TV. Is that what you're telling me?
Well, I'm saying that the VB developers are come from all walks of life, and
I'm gonna get it.
I'm
dead now.
It's the Office developed. Since this thing called VB is an Office sort of. This thing called VB was in active server pages, the old kind. That was a kind of a VB. It was more like an MBasic 80, but it's those are basic programmers too, and they kind of lumped all those together, and they're kind of putting them all in one bucket.
Yeah. Now administrators are basic programmers. I see a lot of them doing scripting.
Right. Wait till you get Yukon, when everything is going to be.
I'm glad you brought this up, because I've recently discovered that we're going to be able to write store procedures in code in VBNet.
Right.
And I'm wondering, as a data.
C#.
Okay, as in any .NET language.
Fujitsu COBOL, why not?
Right, why not?
So what I'm wondering is, and somebody brought this up with me today, and I hadn't thought of it before then, we don't want to just take all this extensive business logic and now move it down into the data tier, do we?
No. If it's not broken, don't fix it.
Right, so let's not imply that that's what we're going to do, and that's what you should do, because you can. If you're a database administrator, you don't want any of that logic, taking up CPU cycles. Am I right?
All things in moderation.
Okay.
Be kind of Buddhist about this. There are certain business rules that make a lot of sense to be in the server.
Of course.
There are
about
some
the
business
data.
rules that really need to be enforced in the UI.
Right.
So we don't make 2 more round trips to the server to try to get a single page transmitted.
Right. We don't want to be doing type or validation on area code formats and stuff in the database.
Right. But it would be handy if the UI morphed itself somehow to match the business rules. So we're not having to redeploy or really waste the user's time. And so some of this stuff does belong in the middle tier and in the form of stored procedures, which I think is just another form of middle tier code. I
really like the Sunblad Brothers book that came out on Windows DNA a couple of years ago.
Wasn't that spectacular?
It was so good. They just nailed it. And especially right in the beginning when it says, when you're deciding where to put business rules, start with the database. Does it belong in the database? Because if you can do it there and get away with it and it will support the rest of the architecture, do it. But there's a lot of things that you don't want in there, and here's why. And they gave some examples where a constraint that they had put in the database sometimes needed to be broken. So what do? Do you remove the constraint and then do what you need to do, put it back? Or do you move it out to the business tier? So it really got people thinking about where do these things belong.
Right.
That was an awesome book.
They're very insightful about the kinds of approaches that they're taking to data and real architectures and real world architectures. Yeah, I've read virtually everything they've done, at least I've tried to.
Well, that's why they're regional directors, right?
Yeah, that's it.
Right. Hey, Carl, we've got Dale Radke on the line from Birmingham, Alabama, and
Hi, Dale.
A blast from the past, Bill. Dale worked with you at one time.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, we worked at Microsoft in internal development for a while there together.
Yes.
Internal development, what's that?
I was writing internal applications for use within Microsoft,
cool.
HR department, finance.
So, you got a question?
Yes, I have been doing ASP development with SQL Server using ADO for quite a while, and try to close out any kind of record sets or other objects that I open right after I use them. And I've inherited some code from another programmer, and this person hasn't been quite so religious about it. There's a lot of code, and I was wondering, as far as hit performance-wise, if I don't go in and close out all of those open record sets, and they will close as soon as the page finishes. But how much of a hit does that really involve performance-wise for an application?
Well, one of the big issues that you're going to be facing with, you're faced with, is orphaning connections. And in ASP old style, the ASP Classic, this was taken care of because when you fell off the page, one of the last things that VB did was run the finalize for you and tore down those objects for you. So it shouldn't be the end of the world. Now, newer versions of ADO, if you're using 2.6, 2.7, you should be fine as far as memory leakages are concerned. So I don't see a real issue there. However, when you convert, you're going to be pooched. That's a technical term. We can talk about the acronym later.
Convert to what, Bill?
When you convert to ASP.NET, ASP.NET, because the way the garbage collector works is entirely radically different. Okay. And you cannot depend on the garbage collector to do any work for you. You can't depend on closed collections or release objects or any of that stuff. Okay. So you have to be more religious about how the objects are declared, when they're declared, and how they're torn down.
That's an excellent
Should
point.
you call the dispose method on any object that has one?
You can if it makes you feel better. If you have to call dispose, there's something wrong. Except in the case I hear the Oracle provider apparently has some sort of an issue.
The new one.
In fact, if you don't call disposed, it will leak the connection.
The new one in
the
1.
New one, right? The new Microsoft version of the Oracle provider.
Huh.
Yeah, that's definitely good to know.
Yeah.
So as a discipline, yes, it's a good idea. And if you run that code through a converter, now I don't think there's an ASP to ASP.NET migration utility. I think it only works in VB6 unless I'm radically mistaken. And if any application on the face of the earth is a candidate for conversion, it's an ASP program.
Yeah.
First, it is so radically better. The ASP.NET is so much radically better than ASP that it makes abundant sense in virtually all cases to move it across.
Yeah, Mark Anders was just talking to us last week about that. It's just a no-brainer.
And it may be painful at first, but it is so much more disciplined. And it's a serious language now for once. The object construction, the object teardown, the way you can reference, the way the sessions are managed, and. It's a deadly serious environment. And if you want to make your applications competitive, you've got to go ASP.NET.
Right, and even though we mentioned in the beginning that you could rename the file extension, I would want to bring up that that's not something I'd recommend to someone to do. I think you'd still benefit more from just simply rewriting it from the ground up.
Oh, absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely. Can you rename the file extensions and get away with it?
Yeah, we just figured that out.
In some cases, if it's a simple page, that works.
Yeah. Okay.
Even with
I'm not an ASP expert either, and I think that sounds scary to me. But
well, it's scary, but I was shocked when I tried it.
Interesting.
So include files work, Mark?
I didn't try anything with an include file. I mean, when I was getting ready to go teach the ASP.NET class I taught this week, I just started writing some simple pages, and I thought, I want to see what it takes to gum up the works. And I kept adding things, and it didn't gum it up until I started to mess around with a record set, and that did it.
Yeah.
But I didn't try an include file. I can imagine that could cause problems.
Well, we'll just reiterate that this isn't a best practice.
And I'm seeing some issues, some disconnects with ADO Classic running in an ASP or a Windows form environment. Most of it works, but there's a couple of issues with late-bound methods that don't. They work the first time, but they don't work the second time. So the first time you execute the code, it works. The second time you get to that line of code, it doesn't.
Boy, I hate problems like that.
Yeah.
So, Bill, what do you think of data adapters and data sets in general? You think people be writing their own data adapters if they want to do serious work?
Write their own data adapters.
I don't think too many people will really get into that. It's so easy just to use
what's there.
Regular,
I've had
programming practices.
I've had experiences where if you make changes in one order and then you reject changes, you'll have an out-of-sync database, whereas if you do them in another order, everything will work just fine, because you don't really have control over the order in which those updates are done.
You do.
Well, you do to some extent, but you have to go into a certain collection and start mucking around with stuff.
There are properties that you can set to say what order you should do them in anyway. But it's the issue is how much should ADO be doing for you? How much should ADO.net be doing for you?
Right.
And I think what they have, the tack that they've taken is not much.
Yeah.
One of the things that I heard at the Author Summit over and over again was the command builder, which is a part of the DIDE drag and drop, and it's also the executable command builder.
Right.
Should be renamed Command Don't Use Builder.
Yeah, just for the listeners, that's what takes a select command, select something from a table where this, that, and the other thing, and then generates insert and update and delete commands that match it. And one issue is just as far as dealing with concurrency, what they do is they take all the original values and compare them in the where clause.
Right.
So if any of those values have changed, and the where clause is like a mile long because they're checking for nulls and this and that.
Table.
For a simple table. So, that can really slow things down. What I tell people is the alternative would be them to put a timestamp field in your database for you, and I think people would be a little more upset with that. So the reason why I said would people be developing their own data adapters is maybe, rewriting those queries and those store procedures to use a better method to deal with concurrency.
I wouldn't go to do that.
You wouldn't?
No. But I've been to some meetings that you haven't been to.
Okay. All right, you have inside information we don't know about.
I can't comment there.
Okay.
But
it's...
okay,
don't do it. We
us.
won't tell you why.
And I think you're absolutely right. The data adapter command builder sucks, but they tried to get the thing out the door.
Yeah. And it's not bad.
They had a pretty big target a pretty big shoe to fit in ADO's command builder internals. Because it was pretty smart. It gave you lots of options. The option explicit property, for example, you could set any 4 different ways to do this. But it's some of the other issues in a serious database is that you often don't have permission to update those columns. You may see them, but you don't have permission to update them. So just because you can select them doesn't mean you can update them.
Right.
So you're going to have to be more selective. Question: how are you going to figure out which are which? If you selected them, how is the command builder ever going to know which ones are to be updated and which ones are not? So maybe they're going to need additional properties to say this is when you create the parameter for this. It says this is a Gazinta read-only.
It's smart enough to know that if I have a formula field, that's like a first name plus last name.
Those are easy to figure.
Yeah, it knows enough not to update that.
Right. But it's more complex than that. And you often have databases where you have lots of columns that you don't have any rights to.
Okay. And it wouldn't know that.
It wouldn't know that.
Yeah.
But so there's going to have to be additional column properties on the either extended properties or some sort of a mechanism. Well, extended properties
like a timestamp.
The timestamp is another issue that lets you know that you can in fact update this column or not on a column by column basis.
Oh, I get it. How about the get schema table in the data reader? That's pretty cool, huh?
Yeah.
I like that. I had to dig for that, though. That wasn't very easy to find. I would never have guessed that it'd be...
my book.
Okay, I wouldn't have never have guessed it'd be in the data reader, though.
Right, and which book would that be, Bill? Is that the one from A Press that you did recently?
Yeah, the ADO and ADO.net examples and best practices.
Very good. Well, I'm going to.
Well, good. There's also a C# version if it'll make you happier.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
Peter Blackburn and I put together a C# version of that.
Good.
Well, Dale is still on the line here with us. Do you have any other questions for Bill, Dale?
Just a general one. Since ADO is so easy to use, are there any circumstances where you would still use anything else other than ADO?
ADO is ideal for SQL Server. It's written hand in glove. It's fine for Oracle. It's fine for that. It's okay for Jet, but there's still things that ADO Classic and ADO.net do not do to Jet. But as we've spent the last hour talking about, I don't ever want anybody to write to Jet again. I think Jet needs to be on its way out. So
right.
So there are things, and ADO also is not suitable for bulk operations. It's not designed to move a database from here to there, and so many people try to do that with it. it's the wrong tool for that job. So if you're doing moving 50,000 rows from the main database to the server, the mainframe database every night, ADO is not the best choice there.
So would you use DTS to do that, Bill?
Yes, DTS or the BCP, the bulk copy program, which is also an API-based or SQL DMO-based interface to do those kinds of bulk operations.
Hey, don't count on your internal clock to remind you that there's a new episode of .NET Rocks available. Sign up for the .NET newsletter, Franklin's Net. Not only will we tell you when the new episode is on and who's on it, but we'll also give you monthly tips, tricks, and real code that you can use. Links to great resources, the news of the month, and a lot of stuff you won't get anywhere else. So go to www.franklins.net, and on the left-hand side you'll see the newsletter link. Just click on that. You'll be glad you did, I promise. Also at www.franklins.net, don't forget to check out the how-to videos in the .NET Code and Utilities section. And that section basically has lots of little samples and really useful utilities that I've created and Mark has created and other people here at Franklin's Net have created. And those are free with source code. Just go ahead and download to your heart's content. Thanks for your continued support. And if you happen to be at VS Connections in Orlando at the end of the month, make sure you stop by in the exhibit hall, the Franklin's Net booth, because we're going to be recording .NET Rocks from the booth and taking your questions and talking to a lot of the speakers that are going to be down there. So now let's get back to .NET Rocks with Bill Vaughn. So Bill, you're going to now. People have heard me talk about the Connection Show, but really a lot of people don't know about it. So you're going to be doing the SQL Connection Show in Orlando, aren't you?
That's correct.
So what do you think of this, the whole VS Live versus Connections thing?
At one time, I thought that they had an awful lot of similar content, but I've talked to a couple of the other presenters, and they say, no, I'm radically wrong, as usual. There's a lot of SQL content in the show here, the Connections show this fall in Orlando. Goes far and above what they had at VS Live. Less so much VB and more SQL Server by a lot.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. It's a great show. What do you think of some of the guys they have speaking?
I think they've got a dynamite crew. Frankly, I go to these shows as much to learn as I do to speak. And I learn from the other presenters, but I also learn from the troops that come in from the field, all sweaty and battle-hardened. And they said they'll get up, they'll ask me a question afterwards that says, he either doesn't understand what I've just told him, or he's coming from an entirely different point of view. I need to explain it different. Or, no, Bill, it doesn't work that way. I've tried this, and this works much better.
Right.
Or I tried that, but, this works 4 times faster.
Yeah. It's just such a concentrated way to learn being at a place like that.
It is.
There's going to be some serious SQL brains down there at VS Connections.
What do you think of Fernando Guerrero?
Oh, he's spectacular. He has come up so many times after my talks and spent 30, 45 minutes with me going over the presentation and helping me tune or helping me understand what it is that I've just said, and so he understands it better and I understand it better. So he's a great asset. I really enjoy working with him. Yeah,
I enjoyed his book a lot too, and I have him also speaking at the VB track on stuff like concurrency, things that VB developers really don't know that much about.
Yeah, I actually got to meet Fernando out at Microsoft. I taught the first beta class for the ADO.NET curriculum, and he was one of the students that came into that class, so that was very cool.
Well, I've seen the new version of that ADO.NET curriculum. I just reviewed that the other day, and there's an interesting set of criteria. They're trying to come up with how to manage collisions.
Right.
Oh, you looked at the new 2-day course that's about concurrency management?
And I had a knockdown drag out with them. I says, okay, you're a traffic engineer in New York City, and you're teaching your policemen and your fire people how to clean up after the accident.
Right.
And you're spending millions of dollars doing it. Why don't you figure out how to make the intersections so they're less vulnerable to collisions?
Preventive measures.
Preventive measures. In other words, design the database from the beginning so you don't get collisions. And so if you do get collision, it's so rare, it's obvious what you have to do. If you set up scenarios, and if you have to think about it to figure out how would you set up a scenario where it's absolutely essential that these two people have the same record at the same time they're holding it in their hands, and they're both making changes to it. And there's fewer and fewer real database situations that are like that, and you can make a couple of minor changes to the way you design the system, and sometimes major changes.
Right, kind of going back to Carl's suggestion about doing time stamping and
right, and concurrency management from the design point of view, as opposed to let's clean up the mess now that we've done it.
Bill, do you teach a class or two with your company?
As I said, I'm semi-retired, so I don't take on a lot of extra work. The conferences keep me pretty busy, and I'm doing user groups. I'm going to Boeing next month, and I'm doing a couple of things for the RD program here in the Pacific Northwest. I have been invited to do a couple of custom courses now and again, and I'm open to that. But
I think it'd be a gas to have you teach an ADONet class for Franklin's Net.
Well, stranger things have happened.
Well, cool. We'll talk about that later. I've been experimenting with the remote class idea, and one idea that I've had, this all started because we have some customers in India that want me to teach classes, and so I've been doing some work with, using remote access with...
like distance learning.
Distance learning.
Okay, I'm reprogramming. I understand now.
Yeah, distance learning. But we're going to do it as such that they're going to set up a training room in the remote place, and I'm going to remote into the computer there, which is going to be displayed, etc. But the idea that I had was to get some of the heavy hitters out there that would like to teach just a piece of this class, like a 1 week or a 2 week class, where we put an application together, and then the person with the expertise in that particular area of the application teaches that portion. So you would teach the ADO portion of it.
Well,
somebody else,
very interesting.
Somebody else, like Alan Cooper might do the user interface, or
right.
I'm just having fantasies here, but.
Have you talked to your wife about that?
I have, and unfortunately, she can't do anything about it. So she doesn't even understand what ADO is, and the other part, she just had a baby, so let's. But we're gonna edit that out. Don't worry about that. So you're in Redmond, Washington.
Yep.
What's the economy like out there?
The economy is turning around. I'm seeing my daughter just got a job. She quit me. She was my editor for my last couple of books, and she just quit and went to work for the Hargett Group here in town, which is putting on people. Microsoft is putting on 5,000 people. And they're standing in line out front as wrecking traffic, people just milling around the outside of the building. And if it wasn't for the dock workers being on strike out here, I think things would be going better.
Yeah, that's an ugly situation.
Yes, very ugly, and I think JW made it even uglier.
You think so?
Yeah.
I haven't really listened. I heard that he's trying to revoke a Taft Act or something like that to get him back to work.
Well, he invoked the Taft-Hartley Act.
Yeah.
And he should have done that weeks ago, and he should have anywhere. We won't go there.
All right. So it's a mess, to say the least.
It's a mess, and Boeing is cutting back quite a bit, and they're cutting back some of their development staff as well, which is helping the traffic. So there's a bright side to everything. The traffic out here is pretty bad.
Yeah, weren't they going to move their corporate headquarters to Chicago?
They did move their corporate headquarters to Chicago, and they moved a bunch of executives out there, and they got forgiveness for a bunch of new taxes and so forth, so they're happy there because the people in the Seattle area kept taxing them to death.
So, Bill, what are you excited about in the future of .NET that you actually can talk about?
I think Microsoft is 150% behind .NET. I don't think there's any question about that, and I think they're excited about it. And they're in the VB time frame. VB was I wonder if we could kind of a thing, and they kind of put it together, and oh my gosh, this works, this is cool, and it works. But they didn't think about it in a very long term.
Yeah.
I think COM is done the same way.
Yeah.
And they didn't take COM to the fourth step. They maybe take it to the second step, but they didn't realize it was going to grow that quickly and be used in so many strange ways. So architecturally, it was very weak. And so when they switched to a new paradigm that was not based on COM, and to a new VB that was not based on VB, and again, the only similarity is the font, is they were unfettered, and now they are free to develop serious languages, serious interfaces, serious tools, and serious connections to the SQL Server and their other database engines. That they haven't been able to do this before because they're all held back by diff-int A through Z.
Yep.
And the old style stuff that they had to carry around in VB, and the old COM stuff that kept holding them back and killing customers and making the customers crazy and hate them.
So they made every change they ever wanted to make, is what the way I
made
understand.
all the changes. They just bit the bullet. Says, "Oh my God, okay, fine, screw COM, forget VB. We're going to move on, and we've got a serious language that's going to be kind of like VB, but not. We have we have some new languages for the Java people. Since we can't play Java, the Java games with Sun, we're going to create our own Java or do something like that. And they've got without creating a one-size-fits-all thing, they've got something that's flexible enough that really can address a wide variety of architecture."
So you think there's really good things coming down in terms of fine-tuning the ADO.NET architecture and all that, or is it pretty much as fine-tuned as it's going to be?
I think that we're going to see a number of significant changes in how ADO.NET works. It's going to be better. In the sense that, remember that ADO in the olden days had a number of black boxes in it.
Yeah.
The data environment designer,
awful,
total disaster.
Ugly.
Data binding, total disaster.
Terrible.
And these kinds of things are not present in the new product, and they haven't made those mistakes. And the conversations that they're having, and for the first time in decades since I've ever worked for Microsoft, they are listening to developers, they're listening to pundits, they're listening to architects outside the company, and designing the product so it does, in fact, meet these real-world needs. When you were in the VB1, VB2, VB3 timeframe, what the product looked like was so carefully guarded that 4 people on the planet could see it before it shipped.
Right.
And they couldn't take advantage of oh my gosh, if we just done that.
Right.
And they kept inventing things that were stuck in the product forever.
Yeah.
Data binding was that way because they weren't open for input when the data binding was designed.
Bill, you just brought up data binding. Certainly that's something that most VB programmers have been taught is evil in a major way. We can do data binding in .NET. Is it evil still, or is it a good thing now?
No, I think data binding is reincarnated and has really come back to life. It's so much more flexible. The kinds of things, the control you have over it, there's no more black boxes, and it's far more intuitive. And considering that the Windows Forms is the unsold citizen, the unknown citizen here, and it can play a big role there too. So yes, data binding is back alive again. I think we've got a good paradigm there to work with.
Well, that's terrific, and it's good to hear it from a guy like you. We know you know what you're talking about.
Well, Bill, you got any final thoughts before we sign off?
Well, I think we're in for some exciting times, and I think developers there's a lot of concern out there that the world is crashing and around them, everything is changing. But I've been in the industry for about 30 years, and if there's anything that stays the same, it's change. We're constantly having to relearn stuff, and those people who just get over it and say, okay, we're going to learn some new stuff and keep learning are going to survive. Those that are going to stick with the old stuff, they're going to have jobs. Writing VB6 programs, writing whatever for 3 or 4 more years.
Do you recommend trying to go it alone without some formal training?
It can really save you a lot of time. It depends on what your time is worth. If you can't afford the training, do it alone, and do go it alone, and just keep pounding on it. So much of the stuff is free; you can try it yourself. But if you can afford training at all, get to it. Get some training. Get some serious training, and go to the conferences. They're not that expensive.
Right.
And go to every single session. Even if you don't understand a word this man's saying, it's going someplace in RAM, and it's going to connect. And we start writing your applications. Oh my God, that was on page 4, wasn't it?
All right, very good, Bill. Well, thank you very much on behalf of myself and Mark and all the listeners out there who really, really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show and explain some things for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bill. That's right. And Carl, we need to get Bill back again another time soon. There's so many things I would have loved to have talked to about, but we just ran out of time.
Yep, that's true.
Well, I had a good time. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you very much again.
So long, guys.
All right, good night.
Good night, Bill.
Good night.